Welcome to the Thought Collective, where we explore the events shaping our world today through diverse perspectives and thoughtful analysis. We bring you conversations that matter. This podcast series is produced by UN Karmavir Chakra winner, Aditya Bosu. Join the community at adityabosu.com, where you'll find more insights and analysis, as well as the complete archive of our articles and podcasts. The Thought Collective, some perspectives on the events that are shaping the world today. Today's episode is
Global Shadows, the widening impact and foreign entanglement in the Ukraine conflict. What began in February 2022 as a conflict largely perceived through the lens of a localized, bilateral dispute between Russia and Ukraine has inexorably drawn in a complex web of international actors. More than 2 years on, the war's character has been fundamentally reshaped, its ripples extending far beyond Eastern Europe to touch nearly every corner of the globe. Mounting evidence and official reports now paint a picture not just of external support, but of direct foreign military involvement on both sides of the front lines, alongside unprecedented levels of financial and material aid. The conflict is no longer merely Ukraine's struggle, it is a globalized confrontation with profound and far-reaching consequences. This podcast episode delves into the multifaceted nature of this foreign entanglement. It examines the substantiated, active participation of North Korean military personnel fighting alongside Russian forces and analyzes the more ambiguous, though officially claimed, presence of Chinese nationals in Russian ranks. Conversely, it catalogues the extensive, coordinated efforts by a broad coalition of nations, led prominently by the United States and European powers, to arm, fund, and train Ukrainian forces. Furthermore, this analysis explores how this deepening international involvement signifies the conflict's metamorphosis into a global issue, dissecting the significant and varied economic shocks felt across Russia, Ukraine, Europe, Asia, and the United States. Foreign military involvement on the Russian side. While Russia initially relied on its own forces and proxies, the protracted nature of the war and significant losses have seemingly prompted Moscow to seek manpower from external partners, adding new layers of complexity and international concern to the battlefield dynamics. Substantiated North Korean presence. The specter of foreign soldiers directly engaging in the Ukraine conflict gained significant substance in late 2024, with corroborated reports of North Korean military personnel arriving in Russia's eastern regions. Initial intelligence, primarily attributed to South Korea's National Intelligence Service, NIS, suggested around 1,500 North Korean soldiers were undergoing training, possibly in preparation for deployment to active combat zones in Ukraine. However, subsequent intelligence assessments rapidly revised this figure upwards, hinting at a far more substantial commitment from Pyongyang. Estimates emerged suggesting North Korea intended to dispatch as many as 12,000 troops, a contingent reported to include specialized forces, officers, and even generals, signaling a deepening strategic pact between the two internationally isolated regimes. Further validation came from NATO, which claimed independent evidence confirming the movement of North Korean soldiers into Russia. Ukrainian military intelligence, HUR, provided a more precise timeline, reporting the arrival of the first North Korean troops in Russia's Kursk Oblast, a region bordering Ukraine that had gained strategic importance following Ukrainian incursions, as early as October 2024. This suggested an initial role in bolstering Russian defenses. The scale of this deployment was corroborated by the United States Department of Defense, estimating approximately 10,000 North Korean soldiers were present in the Kursk area by the end of October 2024. South Korean media, again citing the NIS, indicated a continued influx in early 2025, with an additional 1,000 to 3,000 personnel dispatched between January and February. While the fog of war makes precise numbers difficult to ascertain, the consistency across multiple independent intelligence sources points strongly towards a significant North Korean military footprint. To obscure Pyongyang's direct hand and potentially mitigate international repercussions, these soldiers reportedly operated under disguise, wearing Russian uniforms and carrying fabricated identification documents. Their initial foray onto the battlefield appears to have been brutal. Reports indicated high casualty rates, possibly due to unfamiliarity with the dominant tactics of the Ukraine war, particularly the pervasive use of drones and intense artillery duels. Early accounts described North Korean units moving in large, vulnerable formations across open terrain, making them easy targets for Ukrainian drone operators and artillery. However, evidence suggests a rapid, if costly, adaptation process. Reports indicate North Korean forces began shifting toward smaller, more dispersed combat units and establishing dedicated observation posts to provide early warning against drone strikes. Despite these initial tactical failures, Ukrainian military sources have described encountered North Korean soldiers as disciplined, highly motivated, and proficient with small arms. Adding a chilling dimension, reports surfaced suggesting these troops were under orders to commit suicide rather than risk capture, potentially using grenades, highlighting intense indoctrination and the extreme stakes involved. Definitive proof of their presence arrived in January 2025 when Ukrainian forces captured several North Korean soldiers. These captures provided undeniable evidence, compelling even a reluctant Moscow to eventually acknowledge Pyongyang's direct military support. Casualty figures underscore the intensity of their involvement. South Korean intelligence estimated around 300 North Korean soldiers killed and 2,700 wounded by early 2025, while Ukrainian intelligence placed total casualties, killed and wounded, closer to 4,000 within a similar timeframe. North Korea's decision to intervene appears driven by a potent mix of strategic, economic, and military calculations. Geopolitically, it cements Pyongyang's alignment with Russia in an increasingly defined anti-Western stance. Economically, the benefits are significant for the heavily sanctioned state. Estimates suggest potential revenue between $143 million and $572 million annually, depending on the troop numbers deployed, alongside crucial supplies of free oil and food from Russia. Militarily, the conflict offers the Korean People's Army (KPA) invaluable, real-world combat experience against modern, Western-supplied weaponry, something it has lacked for decades. This deployment serves as a live testing ground for North Korean weapons and tactics, provides access to advanced Russian military technologies, potentially including anti-aircraft, submarine, missile, and satellite capabilities, and allows for the transfer of hard-won battlefield knowledge back to the KPA, potentially leading to significant upgrades in doctrine and overall warfighting effectiveness. It is a calculated move aimed at bolstering the Kim Jong-un regime's global standing, economic resilience, and military power. Unconfirmed claims of Chinese combatants. Adding another layer of complexity, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced in April 2025 the capture of 2 Chinese nationals allegedly fighting with the Russian army in the fiercely contested Donetsk region. This marked the first widely reported claim by Ukraine of apprehending Chinese citizens in active combat roles for Russia, immediately sparking international attention. Zelensky further asserted that Kiev possessed intelligence indicating significantly more Chinese personnel were embedded within Russian forces. These claims were met with a swift and unequivocal denial from Beijing. The Chinese government labeled the assertions totally unfounded, stating it was actively seeking verification through diplomatic channels, while reiterating its consistent policy urging Chinese citizens to avoid conflict zones and refrain from participating in military operations for any party involved. The Kremlin, meanwhile, offered no comment. Despite China's denials, Ukraine presented evidence purportedly found on the captured individuals, including identification cards, bank cards, and personal data, seemingly confirming their Chinese nationality. In response, Ukraine's foreign minister summoned China's chargé d'affaires in Kiev, demanding an explanation and questioning China's stated commitment to peace and its credibility as a responsible UN Security Council member. The US State Department also weighed in, describing the reports as disturbing and labeling China a major enabler of Russia's war effort. Notably, Ukrainian officials themselves characterized the captured individuals as likely the mercenaries. This distinction is critical, attempting to separate the actions of individuals potentially motivated by financial gain from any state-sponsored military deployment, which would carry far graver geopolitical weight. It remains crucial to differentiate between potential individual mercenaries and officially sanctioned Chinese state military action. Beijing has consistently maintained a public stance of non-involvement and has urged its citizens against participating. To date, no independent, credible evidence has emerged confirming direct military support or the deployment of Active People's Liberation Army (PLA) personnel by the Chinese government in support of Russia. Given that Russia permits the enlistment of foreign nationals, it is plausible that individual Chinese citizens could have been recruited. While the presence of any Chinese nationals fighting for Russia warrants scrutiny, conflating potential mercenary activity with official Chinese intervention lacks reliable public evidence at this time. Foreign support for Ukraine, the arsenal of democracy. In stark contrast to the opaque and limited nature of forces potentially aiding Russia, Ukraine has benefited from a massive, well-documented, and largely transparent influx of military hardware, financial aid, and personnel support from a broad international coalition determined to bolster its defense against Russian aggression. Military assistance. The United States has unequivocally been the single largest provider of military aid since the full-scale invasion began. Washington's support has spanned a vast spectrum, including advanced weapons systems, crucial intelligence sharing, comprehensive training programs for Ukrainian soldiers, the provision of long-range attack missiles, and the politically significant authorization for European allies to transfer US-made F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine. The total value of US security assistance runs into the tens of billions of dollars. The United Kingdom has also played a vital role, pledging billions of pounds in support. A significant portion of this aid has focused on lethal weaponry, including main battle tanks, sophisticated air defense systems, and long-range precision strike capabilities like Storm Shadow missiles, complemented by extensive military training programs for thousands of Ukrainian troops. Germany's contribution has been particularly noteworthy, marking a historic reversal of its long-standing post-World War II policy against sending offensive weaponry into conflict zones. Berlin has supplied a diverse array of equipment from both Bundeswehr stocks and industrial production, including vital air defense systems like IRIS-T SLM, Patriot, and Gepard anti-aircraft tanks, a substantial number of armored vehicles such as Leopard main battle tanks and Marder infantry fighting vehicles, and powerful artillery systems like the Panzerhaubitze 2000 self-propelled howitzer. This material support is backed by comprehensive training for Ukrainian forces on German soil. The European Union, acting collectively, has also mobilized significant military support, primarily through the European Peace Facility, EPF. This mechanism has allowed the EU to finance the provision of lethal equipment, coordinate member state contributions, and launch initiatives like the large-scale procurement of artillery ammunition for Kiev. Billions of euros have been committed through the EPF. Beyond these major actors, a vast coalition of nations has stepped forward. Canada has provided armored personnel carriers, NASAMS air defense systems, armored support vehicles, anti-tank weapons, and M777 howitzers. Poland has been instrumental, particularly in the early phases, providing enormous volumes of equipment, including tanks and aircraft, and serving as a critical logistics hub. The Netherlands has made substantial contributions, often participating in joint initiatives with allies to provide equipment like APCs, drones, and Harpoon anti-ship missiles. Australia has supplied crucial munitions, anti-armor weapons, protected mobility vehicles, and has deployed E-7A Wedgetail aircraft to Europe to help protect the flow of aid. The Nordic countries, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, have emerged as significant donors, providing everything from Leopard tanks and Archer artillery systems to advanced air defense missiles and substantial financial aid for weapons procurement. Numerous other NATO and EU members have contributed various forms of military assistance, demonstrating a remarkably unified front in bolstering Ukraine's defense capabilities. Financial and humanitarian aid. The economic toll of the war on Ukraine has been immense, necessitating equally substantial financial support from international partners. The United States, besides its military contributions, is the largest bilateral donor of financial aid, helping to keep the Ukrainian government solvent. However, the European Union and its member states, taken together, represent the largest overall provider of aid, encompassing financial, military, humanitarian, and refugee support. Billions of euros have been disbursed through grants, highly concessional loans, and dedicated mechanisms like the multi-year Ukraine facility. Other nations, including the United Kingdom, Japan, Canada, Norway, Australia, Switzerland, and South Korea, have also provided significant financial and humanitarian assistance. Furthermore, international financial institutions like the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank have played a critical role, providing multi-billion-dollar loan programs to stabilize Ukraine's macroeconomic situation and support essential public services. This unprecedented financial lifeline underscores the catastrophic economic burden of the war and the vital role of international solidarity. The International Legion. Beyond state-level support, the conflict has drawn individuals from across the globe. Shortly after the full-scale invasion, Ukraine established the International Legion for the Defense of Ukraine, a formal military unit within its ground forces composed entirely of foreign volunteers. This legion has attracted thousands of individuals from over 100 nations, ranging from experienced military veterans with combat expertise to civilians offering valuable skills in areas like medical aid, logistics, or engineering. Within the Legion, various national or specialized units have formed, including the Canadian-Ukrainian Brigade, multiple Chechen volunteer battalions opposing Russian influence in their homeland, Belarusian units fighting against the pro-Russian Lukashenko regime, the long-standing Georgian Legion, and many others, reflecting the diverse origins and motivations of these fighters. Their reasons for joining are varied. Some are driven by geopolitical concerns or a sense of moral obligation to defend a nation under attack, others by ancestral ties to Ukraine, and some undoubtedly by the prospect of gaining real-world combat experience. The very existence and diverse composition of the International Legion highlight the conflict's global resonance, demonstrating a personal commitment from individuals worldwide to Ukraine's cause. Globalization of the conflict and geopolitical ramifications. The extensive and multifaceted foreign involvement on both sides irrevocably demonstrates the Ukraine conflict's transformation from a regional dispute into a matter of acute global concern. The confirmed presence of North Korean soldiers fighting for Russia, alongside the still unclear situation regarding Chinese nationals, shows a disturbing willingness by states far removed from Eastern Europe to become directly entangled in the military dimensions of the war. This projection of power, however limited or obscured, underscores the dangerous interconnectedness of modern global security dynamics. Conversely, the massive and coordinated provision of military and financial aid to Ukraine by dozens of countries spanning multiple continents represents a global response to actions widely perceived as a blatant violation of international law and a fundamental threat to the post-Cold War world order. The enduring operation of the International Legion, drawing volunteers from seemingly every corner of the earth, further personalizes this globalization, showcasing individual commitment on a planetary scale. The conflict's outcome is no longer seen as solely determining the fate of Ukraine and Russia, it is recognized as holding significant implications for nations and norms worldwide. This deep foreign entanglement carries profound geopolitical ramifications. The burgeoning military cooperation between Russia and North Korea fuels concerns about the consolidation of a more assertive anti-Western axis, potentially drawing in other states resentful of the US-led international system. China's position remains a critical variable. Its continued diplomatic and economic support for Moscow, combined with the unverified reports of its nationals fighting, strains its relations with the West and adds layers of complexity to the geopolitical calculus. The war has, paradoxically, revitalized NATO, fostering a renewed sense of unity and purpose and triggering significant increases in defense spending among European members facing a newly assertive Russia. In East Asia, North Korea's direct involvement has heightened security anxieties in South Korea and Japan, potentially prompting them to increase their own, albeit often indirect, support for Ukraine, further internationalizing the conflict's security dimensions. The sheer number of international actors involved, each with distinct and sometimes conflicting interests, dramatically elevates the risk of miscalculation, unintended escalation, and wider global instability. The battlefields of Ukraine have become a dangerous chessboard for international rivalries, with consequences extending far beyond its borders. Economic shockwaves across the globe. The war's impact extends far beyond the battlefield and diplomatic chambers, unleashing powerful economic shockwaves that have reverberated through national economies worldwide. Russia. Despite facing unprecedented Western sanctions and predictions of economic collapse, Russia's economy has displayed surprising short-term resilience. This has been fueled by sustained, albeit redirected, revenues from hydrocarbon exports, particularly to Asia, tight state control over the economy, and a massive surge in military expenditure. Defense and security spending has soared to over 8% of GDP, the highest proportion since the Soviet era, fundamentally reorienting the economy towards war production. However, this resilience masks growing long-term challenges. The Kremlin faces an increasingly difficult balancing act between funding the costly war effort and maintaining social stability and infrastructure investment. Labor shortages are worsening as manpower is diverted to the military and defense industries, with many factories operating at full capacity, indicating limits to production growth. Increased domestic demand, driven by state spending, has fueled imports, putting downward pressure on the ruble and contributing to persistent inflation. While sanctions have hampered Russia's ability to access Western technology and finance, limiting its capacity to replenish advanced weaponry, the shift towards a war economy continues, often at the expense of civilian sectors. China has emerged as an indispensable economic partner, providing a vital market for Russian energy and a source of consumer goods and potentially dual-use technologies. Nevertheless, the long-term sustainability of this war-driven model remains uncertain, plagued by resource constraints, demographic pressures, and the potential for social unrest. Ukraine. The economic consequences for Ukraine have been nothing short of catastrophic, representing an existential struggle. The country suffered a devastating GDP contraction estimated between 30 to 35% in the first year of the full-scale war, plunging it into the deepest recession in its modern history. This economic implosion has been compounded by a tragic loss of human capital, with millions displaced internally or becoming refugees abroad, and countless killed or wounded. Russian attacks have inflicted widespread destruction on critical infrastructure, power plants, transportation networks, ports, and industrial facilities. The invasion severely disrupted Ukraine's role as a major global exporter of grain and sunflower oil, contributing to global food insecurity. Poverty levels have skyrocketed, erasing years of economic progress. The state budget is under immense strain, making Ukraine heavily reliant on continuous, large-scale international financial assistance to cover enormous deficits and fund essential services like pensions, healthcare, and education. The estimated cost of post-war reconstruction and recovery stretches into the hundreds of billions, potentially exceeding $500 billion over the next decade. Furthermore, vast swathes of Ukraine's famously fertile agricultural land have been rendered unusable by landmines, ongoing occupation, or active combat. The sheer scale of devastation underscores Ukraine's profound dependence on sustained international support for its immediate survival and any hope of future recovery. Europe. European economies, while not directly ravaged by war, have faced significant headwinds. The conflict abruptly slowed the post-COVID economic recovery. Heavy pre-war reliance on Russian energy imports plunged many European nations into a severe energy and cost of living crisis in 2022 to 2023, marked by soaring inflation, particularly for energy and food. In response to the heightened security threat, numerous European countries have significantly increased defense spending, potentially diverting funds from social programs or other investments. The war accelerated efforts to decouple from Russian energy supplies through diversification, LNG imports, alternative pipelines, and a renewed push for renewable energy sources. Managing the influx of millions of Ukrainian refugees presented economic challenges related to housing, healthcare, education, and labor market integration. Disruptions to trade routes and supply chains, particularly in manufacturing and agriculture, also negatively impacted various industries across the continent. European economies have thus navigated a complex period, striving to support Ukraine militarily and financially while managing domestic inflation, energy transitions, and increased security expenditures. Asia. Though geographically distant, Asian economies have not been insulated from the conflict's economic fallout. Many nations, particularly in Southeast and South Asia, expressed deep concern over the war's impact on global food and energy prices, as both Russia and Ukraine are major commodity exporters. Disruptions to global supply chains affected key Asian industries, including semiconductor manufacturing, which relies on materials like neon gas from Ukraine and palladium from Russia. Many Asian economies experienced heightened inflationary pressures and currency depreciation following the invasion. Altered global shipping routes and increased insurance costs also posed challenges. While Russia has historically been a significant arms supplier to some Asian nations, the war has raised questions about the performance and reliability of Russian military equipment, potentially impacting future defense trade. Some Asian economies, however, may have benefited modestly from trade redirection as Western nations sanctioned Russia, potentially increasing demand for Asian goods or energy resources. Despite these isolated potential upsides, the overall economic impact on Asia has been predominantly negative, exacerbating inflation and contributing to broader economic uncertainty. United States. The US economy, while vast and relatively resilient, has also felt the war's reverberations. A significant surge in inflation during 2022 was partly attributed to the war's disruption of global energy and food markets, alongside persistent supply chain bottlenecks exacerbated by the conflict. The Federal Reserve responded with aggressive interest rate hikes and quantitative tightening to combat these inflationary pressures. Specific sectors face direct impacts, such as the reliance of the semiconductor industry on specialized gases and metals sourced from the conflict region. The substantial military and financial aid provided to Ukraine, while primarily an expenditure, has also had domestic economic effects, stimulating production within the US defense industry and potentially boosting related sectors like energy and agricultural exports as replacements for disrupted Russian-Ukrainian supplies. However, the heightened geopolitical risk stemming from the war also carries the potential to dampen business confidence, investment, and asset prices within the US. Navigating a globalized conflict. The evidence compiled presents an undeniable picture. The war in Ukraine has transcended its origins, becoming a truly globalized conflict characterized by complex and expanding foreign involvement. The substantiated military participation of North Korean soldiers fighting for Russia, coupled with the persistent, though officially denied, claims regarding Chinese combatants, highlights a disturbing trend of extra-regional powers becoming directly enmeshed in the fighting. Concurrently, Ukraine continues to receive unprecedented levels of military hardware, financial aid, and personnel support from a broad international coalition, alongside the contributions of thousands of foreign volunteers fighting under its flag. This deep, multifaceted foreign engagement confirms the conflict's global reach and significance. The economic consequences have proven equally pervasive, leaving indelible marks on economies across continents. Russia, despite projecting short-term resilience through a war-focused economy, faces profound long-term structural challenges and potential instability. Ukraine has endured almost unimaginable economic devastation, rendering it critically dependent on sustained international life support for its survival and eventual recovery. European nations have grappled with energy shocks, persistent inflation, and the difficult necessity of bolstering defense while managing domestic economic pressures. Asian economies have navigated disruptions to crucial supply chains and faced the ripple effects of global commodity price volatility. Even the powerhouse US economy has contended with war-related inflationary pressures and absorbed the significant domestic economic implications of its massive aid contributions. Looking forward, this globalized conflict casts long shadows over international security, economic stability, and the future trajectory of international relations. The shifting geopolitical alignments, rising tensions between major powers, and widespread economic disruptions demand careful, coordinated global responses to mitigate the risks of further escalation and to foster pathways toward a sustainable, just resolution. The stark manner in which this conflict has demonstrated global interconnectedness, militarily, politically, and economically, underscores the urgent imperative for robust international cooperation and persistent diplomacy in navigating an increasingly complex and volatile world.
You've been listening to The Thought Collective, perspectives on the events shaping our world today. This podcast series is produced by UN Karmavir Chakra winner, Aditya Bosu. Join the community at adityabosu.com, where you'll find more insights and analysis, as well as the complete archive of our articles and podcasts. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, keep thinking differently.